Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. This episode is part of a limited series featuring CTOs in the greater Seattle area. We will be digging deeper into the challenges, opportunities, innovations, and the future of tech. Who better to lead these conversations than Fuel Talent's very own Albert Squires and Derek Stevens? We hope that you enjoy the CTO limited series of the What Fuels You podcast.
Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is David Wolf. David is the co-founder and CTO of Jet Closing, a tech startup in the real estate space, working to make all digital home closing the new normal. A UW and Stanford computer science graduate, he has worked in the Seattle area tech scene for over 20 years. Prior to Jet Closing, he worked at Amazon, where he ran the team who built the Amazon retail shopping iPhone app, used by millions worldwide. He also led teams at other local tech companies like Zoom, Motricity, and Infospace. David also happened to be one of Redfin's first customers in 2006 and is passionate about transforming real estate or any lagging industry with modern technology. Welcome, David.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, for all of our listeners, I've been lucky enough to work with you both as a candidate and as a client for several years now, and it's just really exciting to see, from the Amazon days to where you're at right now, kind of the growth. And I know we'll get into that, but I've just always walked away super impressed and so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Cool. Well, we generally start off with rapid fire, so let's get right into it. Morning or night person?
Night, for sure.
Night. So you are the typical software engineer.
Very much so. With kids and work and stuff, you have to get up early sometimes, and I get that. I didn't get that in my 20s, but I get that now. Yeah. But definitely left to my own devices, I'll sleep in.
Totally. What about, I don't know if you're a big reader, but has there been any books that have really impacted you? And if not, maybe a class that you took throughout your studies that have impacted you most?
Oh, great question. I'm sort of a classic sci-fi nerd. I read a lot of the classic sci-fi and interesting stuff more recently. I think a good book I read not too long ago was called Children of Time. And it was about kind of a very unexpected twist at if we messed up here on Earth and tried to bootstrap ourselves in outer space. Wow. But I won't spoil the twists and turns, but it's a very interesting book.
I'll have to check it out. I know you obviously have some experience in this world. Masters in computer science versus getting a BS in computer science and going direct into the workforce.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I kind of made that decision very late. I really enjoyed, my time in the kind of computer engineering department at UW, but I sort of found towards the end of my college career that computer engineering had a lot of hardware focus, and I was kind of liking the software side a lot more. So I just kind of made the kind of last minute decision. I'd love to learn more about computer science and software development and that kind of thing. So I applied and to a few schools and was lucky enough to get into Stanford and spent some good time doing that. And it was a great decision. I learned a ton and ended up kind of concentrating in database stuff there as my specialty, which has sort of come in and out of the rest of my career. It's very interesting subspace, the data side.
Yeah. What if you were to build a startup, and I guess you basically did this at Jet Closing, but if you had to do it again, or you had, an unlimited choice, what language would you choose to build your next tech product?
Oh, that's a very loaded question. And I'll couch my answers by saying probably depends on what you're building, because languages are like tools, right? You have a whole tool bench, and you pick what works for what best for that particular job. At Jet Closing, we ended up kind of gravitating really heavily toward JavaScript, both on the front end and the back end. And, and that was really sort of the ground floor for that startup. And kind of in part because it was really a sort of a dynamic, well-represented language, both in the front end and the back end. And so you have Node.js on the back end. We had used React Native on the front end. And it just made it, easier. And there's vibrant communities continuing to develop in those technologies. Definitely want to pick something that's kind of a living language that's evolving and growing. But that said, if I was doing data science, I'm sure there's other things I would be choosing.
Python or Scala or something. Yeah, exactly. And especially with the prominence of TypeScript, I'm seeing come that full stack JavaScript is definitely seems to be the bulk of what I'm seeing, especially in the startup community now.
Yep, definitely. And the tooling has just gotten so much better. Mm-hmm. The tooling and frameworks and infrastructure, it's, it keeps evolving and growing. So that seems like a strong choice about now.
Totally. I'm sure everyone's seen your LinkedIn profile and you're prominent in the tech scene. What is something about you that they wouldn't see on your resume that might surprise somebody?
That's a good question. Something that might surprise folks is I was the first person to build to popularize the term Easter egg. That nobody would really think of that, but basically back in 1995, I heard this term from a couple of other friends of mine in the kind of software space about like the idea of this hidden thing that programmers put in their software. That, sort of harmless, interesting, novel, but, kind of like a little signature, kind of like artists hide little signatures in their, or signature, inside jokes, that sort of thing in their art. They had it termed as an Easter egg, and I never heard that term before. So I actually built a website in the early web days about Easter eggs to collect what other people found. And really, I don't think that term was in widespread use until I built that site, and it got kind of reasonably popular in the early internet, and now it's all over the place. So
wow,
there you go.
Famous blogger. I had no idea.
Yep. That was my 15 minutes.
There we go. Well, let's go back to the beginning. I mean, were you into computers right as a kid? What did your family do to kind of cultivate that? Or maybe another way to ask is, what is the first computer and how did you use it?
Yeah, so I always loved computers and, was into kind of interesting computer stuff from a young age. I don't know, I just always found them fascinating. My earliest kind of memory when I was very young was, so my parents are musicians and music teachers, and I remember my folks brought home, borrowed basically from the school they were teaching in, probably an Apple or Apple II with a program that is sound interval training. So it basically plays two tones, and you're supposed to say, is that a third? Is that a fifth? Is that an eighth? Mm-hmm. And just sort of ear training. But, I think ever since those early days, it was really just, I always gravitated towards electronics and computers, and probably got my first computer in 9th grade. And that was kind of thinking back in retrospect, that was a big expense for my family. They weren't really well-to-do, very highly educated, but not really in careers that paid a lot. So that was like a big expense for basically their son, who was just interested in this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I really appreciate that they did that for me.
100%. And so you knew pretty quickly that you were a fan of this industry, and so that's obviously when you went into computer engineering. From there on to Stanford. Maybe talk to us a little bit about the early career. I'm sure you started out as a software engineer, and then spin that into a little bit. I think a lot of our listeners are in the engineering space and are always curious of that track to dev to CTO. And so what was the early career like, and what did you focus on?
Yeah, good question. Early in my career, I did, entry-level jobs, QA testing at a voicemail company. Some of my internships were with Intel at in their data security group. And I think in those days, I think what I focused on and what I would encourage others to focus on is both, just a lot of learning. This is all new to you. So, learn what you can, find good mentors, explore these spaces that are, new and interesting. One of the things I remember was, even being just an intern in that data security group at Intel, I was one of the more familiar people with Java. Because that was a brand new emerging language. And so, even as an intern, I was able to really help them develop and contribute to their emerging kind of standards and APIs around their Java kind of security SDK. And so I thought that was really cool. There's always opportunities for you to, bring what you have. But, early in your career, you're also just absorbing a lot and trying to kind of, build context. But then after that, I kind of went straight out of graduation. I went to a startup myself. So that was really my first post-college experience was a startup. And that was very educational from a different perspective in that it was a startup I hated working at, or, ended up hating being there, right? Don't have to go into all the details, but that said, I still learned a ton. So, you learn stuff being one of a very small team, really, high levels of accountability and ownership. Mm-hmm. So that I feel really lucky to have had early in my career, because that ends up being so important later in your career to kind of getting to those manager, director, whatever leadership positions is, if I had to point to just one or two things, it would be really those elements of being accountable, being an owner, not just, a contributor, but really, caring and kind of shepherding things to completion, and maintaining them once they're done. Yeah. You think things are done sometimes as a software developer, but, those of us who've been here in this industry a long time know everything has any good software has a very long life, and it changes throughout that life. And so, being an owner is really critical.
Yeah, so I know DevOps has changed this somewhat, but taking out of the tech, just don't throw it over the wall. Have this deep care for kind of what it looks like in production or what the bugs look like, et cetera, and can even spin that into personal relationships. So one of the things I've always asked is, once you made that jump into your first line manager role, it sounds like because you took ownership, you're obsessed with quality. What recommendations would you have for frontline managers? I mean, looking at your career, do you see any characteristics of frontline managers, whether it's yourself or other leaders now, that help them, A, become great frontline managers, and B, lay the foundation to take that next step?
Yeah. Well, definitely the ownership piece is very important, I think, at all levels. And so, having high ownership really helps grow your career. But on top of that, realize that being a manager of people is different from being an individual contributor. Like, it is a different job. And so, bringing in all these other skills that maybe as an individual software developer, you haven't had to hone as much, like communication, like, caring about your employees, understanding what motivates them, how to kind of create structure for them to work together well, for them to work, well with external partners, for their own career growth, mentorship, coaching, kind of constant feedback. That's the stuff that I learned at the first couple manager jobs as being really critical. And, also elements of situational leadership, I thought were very valuable. So, for example, what I mean by that is, say you have a very junior person on your team and a very senior person on your team. The way you manage them is going to be very different to be an effective manager. Like the junior person is going to need a lot more kind of hands-on attention, specific direction, a lot more specific feedback, where the senior engineer is going to want to be delegated to, right? They want to have your trust, and essentially, I got this, I'll take care of things, as a simple example. But all of that is sort of a whole different skill set that you don't learn in programming class. It's a lot more communication, social dynamics, that side of the coin.
Totally. Looking back on your career, for somebody who wants to be a CTO, as you've looked past all of your leadership and your growth, what do you wish you would have maybe focused on more, or what recommendations do you have to somebody whose ultimate goal is to become a CTO?
Yeah, well, for me, part of my decision about wanting to kind of accept this role, because it is a lot of responsibility, is really being ready for that level of both risk and responsibility. I mean, the CTO role is not the same at every company. So CTO at a startup versus CTO at a large company, very different roles. But for me, that was a key piece is, am I willing to kind of be in that spot? And everybody really should take a very hard look. It's not just another promotion, right? You're sort of the ultimate accountability for your technical organization. That's a lot of pressure. But I'd also say, do you feel you're ready for this role? In that, do you feel like you have had a broad and deep enough set of experience that when you get put in this role of like really having to make essentially company impacting decisions on a regular basis, do you feel prepared for that? And do you have enough experience to draw on for that? Because that's tough. And I just encourage everybody to think about that for themselves. And again, I say, like, CTO of your own startup, well, you're going to learn by the seat of your pants anyway. But realize what you're going into and what the needs of that job are. Another good thing to think about is, how much of a translator you're going to need to be between different parts of your company, between your company and others. Sometimes the CTO role has a large sales element too. Right. So really kind of feel out what those different responsibilities are going to be for the CTO role in your company.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think my last question that's just kind of coming to me before we get into some of the bigger conversation topics is, what would you recommend? I speak with engineers all the time that are at Amazon, that are at Facebook, who are considering making that jump to a venture-backed startup, early stage, seed, Series A, somewhere around there. What are some of the considerations you took into play? I mean, obviously the compensation structures are totally different. The support, I mean, it's just night and day different. Do you have any recommendations on what to analyze or levers to look at as it relates to, should I go big company or early stage?
Yeah, it's a very personal decision, first of all, and I think that's something that I learned very early from that startup that I didn't like being in so much. Is what do I want next for my both where I am in my life and also where I am in my career and where I want to grow. I think that's something I probably didn't realize as early as I could, is sort of how much control you have over your own career. And all these decisions you make is essentially steering your own ship. And so realize that you do have a lot of control. And so, what is it that it interests you? Because you got to be interested in what you're doing. It's not just another job. You got to really care about this and have the personal connection. So start there, and then also kind of evaluate what you're bringing to the table to this role or this company, because everybody's got different experience. And, ideally, you want to find something that's a good fit both for you in sort of the next thing you're looking for, and that you are bringing a lot to that situation that is relatively unique. And that's sort of the best fit in my eyes.
Yeah, 100%. That makes total sense. So jumping into your current role, you've been with Jet Closing for 5 years, is that right?
Almost 5 years, yep, that's right.
Wow, time flies. Tell us a little bit about how you approach scaling an organization through different venture rounds. If you were talking to somebody who's had just spun out of a incubation lab, what are some of the focus areas that you really drive towards, or looking back you wish you would have driven to? And then how has that changed as you've scaled in series?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the things I've tried to do kind of consistently over that time is, we want to make decisions, short-term decisions that get you to whatever that next level is. such as, a revenue target or a particular kind of feature milestone, or answering a really important business question that you need to prove as a startup,
like a product market fit, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So, when you're small, you don't have a lot of resources and you want to move fast. So you're going to have to make some short-term decisions that you wouldn't make 5 years later when you're much bigger. And so the key thing for me is trying to make those smartly so that you're not really saddling yourself with a ball and chain that you're going to have to get rid of later, but that you'll be able to easily pivot when you want to do something different. And also try to make kind of the fundamental architecture decisions smart so that you're directionally right most of the time. Because that just, over time, that gets rid of so much wasted effort. If you're all constantly re-engineering stuff that you took a Band-Aid here, a shortcut there, it gets really, it really draws back your acceleration as a company. So that's something I'd advise.
I mean, a CTO role is part fundraising, part recruiter, part software engineering, part, business and product management. How, especially with COVID coming on over the last 18 months, how have you focused on recruiting and the culture? And maybe a follow-up question would be, how do you keep a strong culture when the team is not in the office and have that ability to connect? Have you had to change the organization and the processes at all?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it is hard I think the culture is one of the hardest things. Being physically in the same space, there are elements of collaboration and culture that are much, much easier. But that said, I feel fortunate that, again, kind of going back to some of those early decisions, we made decisions early that actually made flexible work easy and possible for our team. And so then when COVID hit, basically everybody just went remote, and we were an essential business. So we can and did stay open through all of that as a business. But fortunately, we were able to sort of diversify and go remote and still be fully operational really from day one. But I think now that we've been living with this for a while, there's definitely pros and cons to that for different job roles, for different functions. And I think, we're really trying to maintain as much of the company culture as we can in the distributed environment. But, from a development and developer productivity standpoint, I think it's been just as good, if not maybe even slightly better.
Interesting.
Yeah. But we've really been kind of leveraging that for us on the hiring front because we have that flexibility. And I know, especially now, some companies are really pushing the return to office, especially traditional industries that are, want to kind of go back to traditional ways. And I know we've reaped the benefits of that a little bit by just this week, we hired a closer from another company because they were forcing them to all go back to the office, full time. And they were just like, hey, all I want is some flexibility. Can I work for you guys? It's like, yep.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I gave a presentation or a talk titled David versus Goliath. And it was how the startup community can compete against the Amazon, Facebook, Google, who are putting together these massive offers. And so what has been your approach? I mean, I think especially in today's hyper competitive market, being able to attract talent is critical. And when you're a early stage startup where you don't have maybe the base salaries and obviously the RSUs, you really have to sell a vision. What do you see has been the key to letting you scale at Jet Closing? And what does the future of talent acquisition look like as more and more of these big companies are coming into Seattle trying to compete for the talent here? Yeah,
it's a startup is always going to have a unique value proposition relative to a big company. You're going to be smaller. The things that I think really people appreciate or develop, I'll speak for developers in particular, that they can get at a small company is that perspective and sort of level of involvement across a bunch of different technologies and business decisions. It's really hard to get at a large company. I mean, at a large company, you're going to be in a very specific job doing a very specific thing, and so it can sometimes be hard to bubble up beyond that. So, if you want more visibility and more access to decision making, that's something, I would recommend any growing developer or manager, get as part of their career experience is, you need to have access to where decisions are being made so you can learn what's going into those decisions, so you can expand your own thinking and, kind of start to do that yourself more. And that can be just hard in larger organizations.
Do you, as a recruiting leader, focus more on that value proposition when trying to attract talent, or do you focus maybe on some of the technical problems, or is it more around selling the equity and the vision of the equity and the obviously the exit potential? I'm guessing it's a little bit of all of it, but didn't know if you had recommendations in that space.
Yeah, it's definitely all of it. You've got the company vision, and I think the people that are most excited to work with us are the ones who buy into our company vision, and really care about making the difference we're trying to make. But on top of that, you really care about who you're working with and what you're working on. And so that's another advantage with a young company or a small startup is you're being interviewed by the people you're going to work with. Not just some other team or folks you're not sure about. So they get to know who they're going to be working with a little bit better, and also just the direct access to more modern technology. I think that's another advantage startups have is it's more greenfield just in general. So everything's going to be younger, newer. And they'll have an ability to really own stuff very quickly, and hopefully not work with a lot of legacy technology, but work with actually emerging technology, which again is valuable for career development. And generally, people are just more personally interested in that. Like when you say, "Hey, I'll give you a great example." So when I had to choose between going to Amazon to work on the iPhone app, or at the same day I had an offer from Microsoft to go work in Microsoft Office. But it was to develop the OneNote version for Symbian. Does anybody remember Symbian? It was a OS. There was this partnership with Nokia and Microsoft to build these Symbian phones, but it was dying. Even then, it was on the way out. And so, again, that was a very, very clear-cut decision for me. It's like, do you pick the thing that's going forward or the thing that's dying? I want to learn and work with the thing that's going forward, which, the iPhone at the time was very kind of at the cusp of being like super popular. And I could see that. So that's why you'd want to join a young company doing stuff like that.
I'm hearing, throughout this conversation that your growth heavily, obviously having the strong fundamentals. I mean, that's kind of a given, but follow your passion and then dive into it and care about it full spectrum, and that will inevitably create growth. Moving to a CTO role might not have been the focus. I'm looking for that perfect next step to get my resume to a certain degree, but I want to solve complex greenfield problems in industries that I care about, and the results will come.
That's right. Follow your curiosity. I think that's what I've always looked at for myself.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's pivot real quick and chat a little bit about machine learning. Obviously, ML/AI is a huge push across all companies, it seems. There's obviously a big spectrum. Some people are putting some basic statistics on it and calling it machine learning, and some companies are investing heavily on building the ML infrastructure that you're obviously in, the data infrastructure that you're going to need to be able to apply those models to. What's kind of your vision of where things are at and where they're going, and if it's always makes sense to start investing in machine learning and AI?
Yeah, this is a really exciting and rapidly growing space for sure. You can tell just by going to, say, AWS reInvent that Microsoft is just pouring resources into SageMaker and all sorts of other infrastructure on AI and ML. I think with the goal of really making it more accessible to the average developer and development team rather than having to have a specialized data scientist, have this specialized role. And nobody really understands what they do or how they're doing it. If they can create tools and infrastructure that makes it easy for the average developer to solve problems with ML and AI, then they've won, because this stuff also tends to be very computation intensive. So it's a win-win for them, right? They get more AWS spend by solving these problems.
Yeah.
But that said, I think it's good to understand enough about what these systems are capable of doing to really formulate what problems of yours are a good fit. Because everybody loves to throw these buzzwords around, and
Right.
Of course they can solve a lot of very interesting problems. But realistically, you have to figure out, well, what problems for me should be solved via machine learning. So what we've looked into so far at my current company is really around we deal with a lot of documents and structured but not formally structured data. So you get a lot of bank statements and these things that are often have very similar information in them, but there is no standard format for them, for example.
Yeah.
And so that's a great body of stuff to use machine learning for, because you can train on it. Essentially, we have a lot of documents that we process on a daily basis, and now years of history. So we can use that as a data source to train models to identify important information, classify documents appropriately, and really sort of expedite the workflow and processing of all that communication that happens back and forth. And so that's some of the things that I would say to think about is, machine learning, for example, is only as good as the data you can train on.
Who's the first hire if you're going to start a team?
Well, great question. And I think it really does depend on the problem you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, some of these problems that we're trying to solve right now in the document space, there are actually commodity technologies coming out that are relatively easy for developers to leverage and train with and customize to solve some of these problems. And so that's where we are. We decided not to hire a data scientist, but instead really just do a short-term contract with an experienced data science developer, ML developer, to essentially bootstrap our technology and our development team, so that we're sort of pointed in the right direction, and then can go from there. And that's been really helpful for us. But that said, if you're really building custom models, if some of these machine learning and AI problems are core to what you're trying to solve and there's nothing commodity out there, yeah, you're probably going to have to go down that route and get some smart data scientists on your team to figure out what you even need to build.
I mean, it sounds like stick with, follow the business problem first and stick with your core competencies. I mean, if there's something you can, but it's the whole buy or build type of question, but I'm sure in a young startup without unlimited resources, you need to look at that trade-off, and maybe it makes sense to bring it off the shelf at first.
Yep, exactly. And then, something else I'd say for folks out there who are thinking about dabbling with machine learning is, the data is so critical. So think about what data you would need to train on, and do you have that data? Do you need to prepare that data or have it tagged or customized in some way to bootstrap your machine learning? Because the reality is sometimes that can actually be the hardest, most time-consuming thing is getting the data that you need and getting it in the right place and format to do stuff with.
Totally. Well, tell me a little bit about your current company, and want to give you a chance to plug what your hiring needs are. I think we have 50,000 listeners, and hopefully a lot of them are software engineers that are excited about what you guys are building. What do you foresee the hiring future look like at Jet Closing?
Yeah, well, so at Jet Closing, for those who don't know, we're basically a young company trying to make digital closings the new normal. So this is part of the home purchase that's at the end of the road. The buyer and seller have agreed. You need to go to title and escrow to actually move all the money, handle all the liens, judgments, do the title insurance, and kind of get the keys into your hand at the end of it all. And that's just a really lagging industry. Anybody who's bought a home probably has realized
hundreds of I mean, how many trees do we chop down every time you do a refinance? It's crazy.
Yep, and the in-person signings and check clearing, it's terrible. It's something that needs to be brought into the modern world. So that's what we're
expensive.
Doing. And expensive, yes, exactly. So that's what we're doing. We operate in several states and growing. And really, we're using technology to streamline that, both for customers by giving them a lot more access than is typical to information and communication through mobile and web apps, but also behind the scenes with really innovative technology like machine learning and other things from a process perspective and a tools perspective, just to make this possible and streamlined and easy and all digital. And that's been really especially important of late, being able to not have to go in anywhere to sign or to do everything electronically. And that's what we were founded on.
100%. And so would you recommend somebody go to jetclosing.com and do the career pages there, or?
You got it. We have all our jobs listed and always looking for great developers. So come join my team.
Awesome. Well, final question. What fuels you? What gets you out of bed? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I've always really enjoyed trying to understand how things work. So it's really that drive to understand, I think, that fuels me. And then, secondarily, I love finding ways to cut out needless hassle and effort for people. So that's what we're trying to do at Jet Closing, but I think that's what I've tried to do everywhere I've worked. And I think it's really just about giving you your life back, really, when you cut out the stuff that nobody wants to do or deal with. It lets you do other things that are really important to you.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.